let me begin this webinar today, which we're very excited about, the Productivity Commission. We've got 4 deadly panellists who will all get to introduce themselves shortly. But I'll kick off by acknowledging country that I'm on today, the lands of the Ngunnawal Ngambri people here in Canberra, or Canberra. And as a Juukan man, this place has been a very welcoming, special place for me and my family to have been nurtured on this country. So I do want to acknowledge ancestors and elders of this place. What we'll do is to introduce each of the panellists. The panellists will introduce themselves and acknowledge country that they're joining from. I might just give a bit of foreground to this seminar or webinar before we do some intros. And as many of you would know, the Commission's report that was delivered in December last year was a report that really challenged the Productivity Commission as an organisation that's had a history in economics to really come into the space where we were bringing together the toolkit that sits within economic frameworks, as well as bringing Indigenous knowledges into that space and looking at the space in between where that intersectional space merges. I mean, the reflection that I have on that work really is that there are a couple of things that we offered in the work, notwithstanding that it was a whole lot of work that had taken place over many decades before through multiple inquiries and reports. And I do want to acknowledge so many people on this webinar today who have been contributors and advocates for that work. So right up front, want to acknowledge all of you mob. What we were able to do was to put a figure around the size of the annual sales in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander arts and crafts market, $250 million, 250 million. And we were able to look at segmentation of the market. And the one that is often quoted and often misquoted is that segment, which is the souvenir and the kind of merch at the souvenir end. About $80 million. The often misquoted is the 2/3 fake. 2/3 fake in that segment of the market, not 2/3 fake in the overall market. The other that the Commission took a very clear view on was the need for standalone or sui generis legislation. Had been called for by many previously, but that standalone legislation, cultural rights legislation for traditional owners to be able to protect their cultural assets as we described it. The other, which is the impetus for today's conversation, was about strengthening the sector and the importance of having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leadership in the sector, in the very sector that is about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander arts and crafts, and recognising that Indigenous people within the Indigenous arts sector are significantly and seriously underrepresented. So this is the focus of today's conversation. I recognise as well that there's a lot going on in the public domain, in the public discourse at this very minute about a whole set of questions. I would hope that this conversation today, within the respectful space that we occupy, allows panellists to kind of speak to the topic at hand, which is Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander leadership within the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander arts and crafts sector. So we won't be moving into public commentary around the sorts of things that are occupying many of our minds right now. There are inquiries, investigations underway, and they need to be allowed to run their course. So just, I guess I'm appealing to you today as participants to respect and honour that for this webinar specifically today. We'll have the chat function open, so if you've got questions or comments that you want to throw into chat, as a facilitator, I won't be looking at chat, but Claire and the team from the arts team will do some curating of that. So we'll have some time at the end of the session, or towards the end of the session, to respond to participants' questions. So with that, I might now go to invite our deadly panel members to introduce themselves and perhaps put some pointers on the sorts of things that they'd like to see in the discussion today. And I'll go firstly to Belinda Briggs. Belinda, you're on mute. Sorry.
That's a good start. Hello, everyone. My name's Belinda Briggs. I too would like to pay my respects to the country I'm on today, Yorta Yorta country, my elders and ancestors, and to everybody in this webinar today, to your country and people also. I'm located in Yorta Yorta country, as I said, in northern Victoria, in the Goulburn region, and today in the town of Shepparton. This is where I've grown up, and this is floodplain country. We're about 2 hours drive north of Melbourne, and I guess that's the context, I suppose, for where I'm speaking from today, and the various roles and hats that I wear here. I am a mum, and I have 2 boys. I'm a curator here at the Shepparton Art Museum. I'm a director for our local Aboriginal Arts Centre, Kaila Arts, and also the Rumballara Football Netball Club. For those that don't know, the Football Netball Club is an important piece of cultural infrastructure that we utilise to drive certain outcomes and aspirations that our community holds. So just thought I'd mention that as well. And I also work for the Kaila Institute. The Kaila Institute is sometimes hard to describe. It is referenced, I suppose, or known as a policy think tank type organisation. It's really another tool. I see organisations as a tool. So it's a way for us to harness our aspirations that I guess the late 70s, 80s models, versions of organisations, I guess, didn't allow us to, aspirations, they didn't allow us to realise them in the way that we needed to because of funding, obligations and bureaucracies. So it's about being able to innovate and come up with the sort of programs and services or whatever it is that we think our community needs. So we're very big on being able to set our own priorities and being able to, work with local organisations, both Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal, and local industry to deliver those. So, yeah, that's a little bit about, I guess, the context of where I am and the various experiences that I've had growing up here and how I come to be even here at the Shepparton Art Museum and on the board at Kaila Arts.
Thanks, Belinda. And we'll pick up on that point that you've made about, local people in control, setting our own priorities, and what it might take in terms of organisational frameworks and infrastructure. So thank you for that. Chad?
Hi, everyone. My name is Chad Crichton. I'm the CEO of the Aboriginal Arts Centre Hub of Western Australia. We're a peak body for Aboriginal Arts Centres over this way in the West. Been in this role for about 5 years now. The history of Archwa goes back to about 2009, when artists at an event in Perth called for a peak body to be established, and we initially performed under an organisation called Regional Arts WA. In 2015, the committee overseeing that program, made up of representatives of art centres, decided to incorporate, and thus Archwa was born. Our office is located in Bulu or Perth on Wajak Noongar country. I want to acknowledge their elders and our emerging leaders here in Perth and across WA. Me, myself, I'm Bardi and Yulnyul man from the Dampier Peninsula north of Broome. I guess my history in the art space is a long one. I've always loved art, been surrounded by it growing up in the township of Broome in all of its many forms back in the 90s and 80s, with things like Brand New Day. I grew up in the backyards of the Pickering brothers, playing music, and always had a love for art. Our family are quite humble beginnings, humble people, and I've been quite fortunate in my pathway to where I am today. And some of my work history is after high school, studied law, and found that I didn't really want to be a lawyer, but I found that it's quite useful in what I do today. I ended up doing a fine art degree and set out on a pathway in the art space. And like I said, was very fortunate that a lot of things sort of fell into place. I was provided an internship at the Art Gallery of WA. That was a 3-year internship that coupled with university postgraduate study at Curtin University of Technology. And then I had kids around the age of 22 and wanted them to grow up back home and learn who they are and where they come from. So I went back home and worked with the Kimberley Land Council. Part of my studies at Curtin was in heritage studies, and so I slipped straight into working in that space at the Land Council. And I worked there for just over a decade and worked on many things. And lastly, I was the manager for native title activities in the West Kimberley. And then I came back down to Perth for my kids' high school. And here I am at Archwa. And I'm very passionate about how, I think this discussion is very timely. There's a lot going on nationally, and I'm very passionate about seeing some initiatives kick off and, something real happen to support more people to have opportunities like I have had.
Fantastic, Chad, and really keen to hear what those specific initiatives might be, either as you're kind of rolling them out, or what needs to be done, where are the gaps, and where do we need to go to into the future. Francesca.
Yeah, thank you, Rom, and wonderful to be joining you from the lands of the Gadigal people of the Aurora Nation. Where we live in many built-up areas, and often the ancestry, the spirits of those who've gone before, and the custodianship and leadership that happens in these amazing metropolitan areas are never lost. And of course, we know sovereignty never ceded. And in that regard, I also want to acknowledge my ancestors. For those of you, my people are from the top end regions of Australia. They are the Larrakia, the Waterman, the Bardi, and the Yanyuwa. and you know, listening to Belinda and Chad, you know, we come from many different parts of this continent, and our family, our culture, certainly empowers us in terms of the work we do in these important spaces. I'm the Executive Director, First Nations Arts and Culture at the Australia Council for the Arts, soon to be Creative Australia. Been fortunate to be in this role for the last 2 years. I've worked in the First Nations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander arts, culture, heritage space for at least 35 years. I'm fortunate to work in Aboriginal organisations as well as state and national museums and art galleries. And I guess if for me, what I would like for us to have the opportunity to speak to is what does leadership look like in the sector? Often we go to a Western framework of what leadership is, you know, and as we all know, culturally in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, leadership is through mentoring and guiding and elders inviting you into spaces and caring for you as you grow and you learn. And I guess that's the approach I have tried to ensure that I build into any workplace that I enter, or any areas of responsibility, how to make space for more First Nation people so that our stories can be led by us, for us in the very first instance. Obviously, we work in spaces where our stories and our voices were told second, third hand by non-Indigenous people. And so my time working in museums as a curator and senior curator and heading up repatriation and departments, it's always been about how do I bring more people into this space? How do I give them the agency and the voice so that their stories can be told? So fortunate to be able to do that at the National Gallery with the establishment of the Wesfarmers Indigenous Arts Leadership Program. But equally, in my role as chair of the Darwin Aboriginal Art Fair Foundation, a role I held as the inaugural chair for 10 years, was to not only grow that, but allow for a platform for arts workers and art centres to represent themselves. And of course, we also embedded a curatorial program called Cultural Keepers, which wasn't restricted to curators, but rather First Nation people who are working in this important space of caring for country, caring for artists, caring for elders, and caring for Jukupa. And so I guess that's what I want to identify as part of points for discussion is what is the workforce development needs of the sector? What have we learnt to date? What are our aspirations in terms of future representation? And also what mechanisms can we put into place so that this isn't dependent on the whims of government and or good or not so good institutions, or but rather what sustainable mechanisms can we put in place so that we get this remarkable perpetual motion happening in our sector where it just becomes this remarkable force. And can I say, when I started in museums way back, can you believe how long ago, Rom? way back when. You know, there was a small handful of Aboriginal people working in this space. Peter White, Chad, you were there, Phil Gordon. It was small and it was just the museum. And of course now we've got a bigger, remarkable cohort across museums, galleries and Indigenous organisations. But what might we do to move forward, increase that number and ensure that it becomes self-sustainable? Thank you. That's back to you,
Thank you,
Ron.
Francesca. Wonderful list of questions there. And the idea that a whole lot of blackfellas in perpetual motion kind of appeals as well. But what's the fuel, I guess, in my mind? You know, Chad talking about, and Belinda, all of you talking about how culture kind of keeps us nourished and is the fuel that keeps the flame going. So let's come back directly after Philip and try to get to that question around what type of leadership, what do we need for the Indigenous arts sector? Philip.
Thank you, Romley, and thank you for pulling together this webinar. I think it's a really important session to be had and keeps momentum going in terms of our workforce and leadership conversations that are long overdue and need to be had. I'm Philip Watkins. I'm the CEO of Desart. Desart is an Arts Centre member-based organisation based in Mbantua, Alice Springs. I'd like to acknowledge the Marika Tui and Kurunguru and all Mbantuarinya people from this area. It's country that I was born on and have grown up on. My family's Central Aranda, Larrakia and Warramungu. As I said, I was born in Mbantua, and it's a area that has nurtured me. My working life has been one primarily within Aboriginal organisations, in particular Central Australian Aboriginal Media Association and Central Land Council, who I give credit to giving me the capacities and capabilities to do the job that I do now, a job that I hold much honour in terms of those that I work with and the sector that I represent. All my working life has been in the arts and cultural space. I suppose a little bit of background. You know, have always been, I suppose, committed and interested in the arts, and certainly in the early days sought to work in the mainstream institutions, or only one here in Alice, after leaving school. But you know, found many doors shut and very little opportunities open to somebody like me who comes from the town that I come from. And 40 years later, I don't see much change has happened. Those barriers and challenges still exist. And you know, slowly changing, but nonetheless still exists for many a mob here in Mbantua, in Alice Springs. I work, as I mentioned, for Desart and hold a leadership position here within the organisation. Our footprint covers the southern half of the Northern Territory, into Northern South Australia and into Western Australia, where we have art centres who are members. A big passion and commitment by Desart, directed by our board, is to give opportunity for art workers to take on many different roles within the art centre context, but in particular leadership and administrative positions. There's many challenges that we face, but I also see many opportunities, and you know, when those opportunities are able to be grasped, what falls out of that is magic, in terms of the operations of an art centre. That is really a big passion of mine, in terms of how particularly remote and regional art workers can have opportunities to be full participants in an industry and a sector that provides that's critical in terms of, you know, both, you know, cultural, social, economic opportunities. So that's sort of where I'm coming from, and yeah, look forward to the discussion to be had.
Thanks, Philip, and thanks, panel. Those introductions and pointers were really valuable. I wonder whether we could pick up on a couple of things in the conversation now, and I might just pick up on a point that you made, Francesca, the question that you put, which was, what does leadership look like in the sector? Now, this focus, you know, the context to this was there is an underrepresentation of Black leadership in the sector. And I think that's still the focus of the conversation, but are you also speaking to what does leadership more generally, non-Indigenous people working in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art sector look like as well? So just sort of open that conversation up about leadership, and then specifically about Black leadership of the Indigenous art sector. So maybe to you, Francesca, and then others jump in.
Thank you, Romilly. In regards to leadership, as you say, we've got two scenarios here at the moment. We've got a sector that is looking for First Nation leadership, and we are, and this is right across the arts industry. But if we look at the visual arts alone, we've got at least 80 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art centres. We've got several remarkable peak organisations that also advocate on behalf of those art centres. We've got Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people working in institutions, and we've got, and in these institutions, they are both at the governance level, at the program delivery, and we have Indigenous engagement in terms of public programming. And there is a real appetite in the sector, which is wonderful, for First Nation leadership. What we still have, though, very much is a Western institutional framework. We've got a colonial framework that says that there is organizational structure, there is hierarchy, there is bureaucracy, there is process. And when I started in the sector, and Chad can also relate to this, I'm sure, when you enter into these institutions, you are, one, both grateful for the opportunity, but then you equally then become very overwhelmed by the responsibility, because you're often at a junior level and you're often expected to handle everything First Nation, everything Indigenous. Now, scarily enough, I don't think that's changed. So, and welcome thoughts from other panel members as well. So we've got a Western organisational structure that operates with its own structural framework that is about colony. It is about hierarchy. It is about privilege. It is about expertise and excelling and becoming a leader. In our cultural context, of course, in our community, something that sustained us for tens of thousands of years, leadership is a, you might as well flip it on its head, Rob, because from my perspective, it's the best form of leadership. You have eldership who hold this remarkable space, and it is a collective of eldership that identify, encourage, walk alongside of, guide a young person all the way through the system. So at no point in a cultural context would you define yourself in that community context as a leader. You are a small person. You are a child being brought up through the system. And so if we think of our eldership, how many of our elders put their hand up and say, I'm a leader? You know, it's the government or the non-Indigenous interface that says you're a leader. You are now, you know, having to take on this role of setting a standard, and you know, so I think leadership comes in what is a very complex, live, organic, contested space, and so having more Indigenous people in this conversation means that First Nation principles of leadership can come to the fore.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rumley.
Terrific. You mentioned Chad, and I'm also keen to hear, Belinda, you're deeply embedded within your Yorta Yorta community and what that looks like for you. Francesca's talked about our own definitions of leadership, and there's this tension between white institutions, Western institutions, and our way of seeing the world and behaving in the ways that we need to, with all of the cultural obligations that we have. So might go to you first, Belinda, and then Chad, perhaps.
Yeah. So I'll just say firstly, I just did get a notification on my laptop. It may do some sort of reboot. So fingers crossed it doesn't, because I can't work out how to stop it. But
Okay.
I guess just listening to Francesca, I'm thinking about my experience and reflecting on I guess how I've come to know myself. And you know, you can't help but as you mature begin to realize that, you know, you're in a world where there is this external world, I suppose, that you are responding to and shaping you or impacting you and asking you to I don't know, hold yourself in a certain way, you know. Here in Shepparton, largely, I guess, you know, through my dad and his work and just him as a father and the way in which I've learnt from him and my mum and the stories from my grandparents, aunts and uncles, that whole extended family network, that has been what I look at as my first education. I didn't go to university, and I saw my community around me as my university, and I've been really blessed with lots of positive mentors and people really strong in their identity, and who have, I guess, helped usher me through different spaces. And, you know, Francesca, you're one of them, I guess, in this recent chapter of me coming into the arts and this Western idea of the arts and the institution. I didn't really have the arts on my radar, I suppose, until and like, I guess, being aware of what's going on in the arts sector until 2016, when I began my art residency with the Shepparton Art Museum. And I've been lucky to have been supported by my community, people inside the art museum that have, I guess, made sure that I was looked after and respected and supported And the story, you know, that my dad talks about, this idea of coming into town, it was the late 70s, possibly 60s, but 70s and then 80s, I guess, when people were coming off the fringes of town, and, you know, looking to create a life and send their kids to school, get employment, all that sort of thing. And mind you, it was 1939 when our people walked off Cumragunja. So from 39 to, you know, the late 60s and then 70s, there's this gap of, you know, hardship and no sense of security around future. So the late 70s, our Aboriginal cooperative was set up, and it's still here to this day. But it's largely, you know, I guess it's got, you know, all the strings.
Belinda, I think that might be the reboot. Can you hear us? Maybe not. Chad, we might go to you. Francesca mentioned, you know, so few in the sector, mostly around museums in the early days, but that's been growing. And you talked about a pathway specifically that you had. Where do we need to take this thing? And given the opportunities, I do want to go back to referencing this new cultural policy. Workforce is embedded as a priority. We've got a bunch of national and jurisdictional level cultural institutions that are signed up to having Indigenous leadership. What does that look like? So as we move into the last 20 minutes, if we can kind of think about and speak to what needs to be done, what needs to be done by governments, what needs to be done by industry and others, to sort of help us through this next phase. So maybe Chad and Philip, if you can pick up the yarn from there.
Yeah, I can't believe it's been about 20 years now. Hey, Francesca, that I kind of was this young, skinny little fellow from Broome starting out at the Art Gallery of WA. And I was really lucky to have really good mentors in that space. I worked closely with Clotilde Bullen, who's recently been at the MCA and now back at the Art Gallery of WA in Perth. Also Glenn Isiga Pilkington and Carly Lane. We've all been there at the gallery together at different times in the past. So they really sort of nurtured and supported me, and we supported each other on lots of different things. A lot of those issues that Francesca raises about, you know, you're that person to go to on all Indigenous matters. And I've been lucky also in going back home and working in the native title and heritage space to work really closely with all my old people, which is one of the things I really feel thankful for, because most of them have now passed away. So a lot of my like Amba, Maja, all the men bosses were people like Paul Sampy and Frank Davey, Roy Wigan, Frank Kajay, Sebastian. So all really embedded in me a lot of their cultural knowledge, but also respect, and that, you know, that importance of listening, and really just listening to what they wanted to do and making those messages really key to what you do and everything all of your work, all of your life sort of things. And then in the workplace, I've had really good technical mentors. So I guess what I'm saying is that you got to kind of look at all of your mentors and really take what you can from everyone to grow. The technical kind of things, I mean, is in the workplace, those management skills that often you can really only learn on the job. And I've been lucky to have really great mentors, both in those management areas, both at the Art Gallery WA and in the Kimberley Land Council. The Kimberley Land Council is a very interesting place to work. It's, you know, they really do nurture young Aboriginal leaders, and you can just look up in the Kimberley now at all the mob around my age, sort of in their 40s, or there's quite a few of us who have come up through the Land Council, you know, and started, you know, 10, 15 years ago in junior positions. And I better, of course, mention my mum, who, you know, as a single mum, you know, she's a very strong woman, always valued education, and also in terms of culture, always sent us boys off to with our uncles to learn how to hunt and that sort of thing. But in terms of like the formal kind of pathways and things, and having a bit of a think about it, and coming back to the National Cultural Policy, I think it'd be good to see a review of the awards, pay rates, and it, you know, should better reflect what the creative industries looks like today. Should see dedicated funding to enable access to vocational education and training, and tertiary education. There is buckets of money out there. The thing is, like, how do we get access to it? The knowledge of that is often sort of squirreled away, and I mean, you need to just know who to talk to in government or within those institutions. I think government should encourage the adoption of STEAM and not just STEM. STEM is really big here in WA because we're a mining state, but we really need the education across the board in the arts to start, and that to be seen as a valued pathway to, you know, a career embedded in our high schools. And I'd like to see government support peak bodies to develop these, you know, I guess, partnerships, programs, and models for education and training in our areas, and then further support art centres and artists and arts workers to have access to funding and other means to make those models successful. And a great example of another sector where all of this works is the Indigenous Ranger program. It's funded enormously more than Aboriginal art centres. Has you know, working in the Kimberley with rangers, I'd go out to a community all the time and see, you know, up to 12 to 14 rangers sitting in a room with a TAFE lecturer or a tutor, working with them on getting qualifications knocked off. And some of the work we've been doing at Archer is investigating what exactly are the jobs that exist in art centres, and then how do we match training to those. But in the learnings we've had through our Aboriginal Art Worker program, we've seen that the qualifications are often not suitable, or they're not on scope because they don't have the numbers. And so I think if we can kind of do a bit of an assessment or evaluation of this, I think there's definitely a need. I think people would definitely want to pursue some of these training and, or, you know, these qualifications. I think it's just a lot of them aren't available. And in WA, it's the universities are also sort of teetering on the edge of sort of, you know, not providing the courses relevant to someone wanting to pursue a career as an artist or anywhere in the creative industries. Yeah, so I mean, I can get into lots of detail and things, but I'll leave it there.
That's terrific, Chad. There's a whole sweep of things there that I think are really relevant, and no doubt as Creative Australia gets established, there'll be things that, you know, many will feed into that workforce development program. Philip, can I go to you and then maybe back to Belinda? You did drop out, Belinda, so if there's anything else that you wanted to add to there. Phil?
Yeah, just to go back to a couple of points Francesca raised in terms of, you know, I suppose those of us who've gone into, you know, into the work where we are one or few First Nation people, and that the isolation that's you know, that we confront, and then the expectations that are, you know, that are placed on us can be enormous, and expectations by non-First Nation bosses, I suppose, within others within these organisations. But I suppose want to reiterate that within our own communities and where we're from, there's also another level of accountability, that when we walk out the doors, that we're still accountable to the communities that we're from or that we may be representing. And often, certainly in my experience, First Nation cultural and creative priorities at times conflict with what the Western nations are, or what those priorities of that organisations are in terms of the programs that they may deliver, and at times that can be really challenging for us. For example, if we need to participate in a cultural activity because that's our obligation to do that, an expectation from our communities to do that, that's not necessarily recognised, and we may have to take leave or our own personal leave. But in some ways, it in a lot of ways gives addresses our own professional development needs within community, learning from our elders, learning from our community. So often those priorities aren't recognised, and that's because there's and I do mean this in a respectful way. In some cases, it's basically can be from ignorance or unconscious bias. At its extreme, it could be considered sort of a racist, embedded racist cultural embedded within that institution or organisation or individuals you may have to report to. So I think these things need to be considered in terms of how we do grow leadership, how we do support leadership, support taking on more responsibilities. Just in terms of and that flows through, I think, through maybe not only the organisations or where we're working, but across a whole government and industry stakeholder interactions that we have to have daily. So it's critical. We build this leadership, and they are, and we are in all these places. And that's certainly grown in my work life time, but as we know, still really underrepresented. And I think because of this, we have issues around when programs or policies are developed, they're not really with most times with good intent, but without that understanding and our placement within these positions of influence, often these policies or these programs fail. I think also, just looking at strategies going forward, we must understand what has failed and why that's failed. I use the example of Alice Springs, in terms of CAMA, Central Australian Aboriginal Media, at one time, was supporting skills development and supporting young people in roles, particularly in film. And out of our community came people who went on to international acclaim, telling our stories the way we need to tell them. But that's fallen off now. And the question in my mind, let's unpack this. What happened there to ensure that what's needed going forward, we're also aware of what challenged us now, so we don't have these opportunities anymore. I think the other challenge, and particularly I have here in the role I have, is we work across two state jurisdictions, a territory jurisdiction and a national one, and there seems to be at times no coordination, and in fact different approaches conflict or undermine others. And so that just I suppose that the jurisdictional framework we work in throws up a whole lot of challenges in terms of trying to progress. So there is no coordinated or collaborative approach, I find, a lot. That inhibits us in terms of supporting our priorities, whether they be in workforce development, creating opportunities for skills development, new opportunities in terms of taking on greater roles and agency for an industry that should belong to us in all its facets.
Thanks, Philip. I'm really conscious of the time. This probably needed to be an hour and a half, actually, on reflection. We're just kind of scratching the surface. There's so much more to talk about. But at the outset, I did say that we'd have a bit of a look at whether there are any questions emerging from participants. So Claire, is there anything that, I'm not looking at chat, so is there anything that is bubbling forward? Otherwise, I might get the panel to kind of give a couple of minutes of the sort of key takeaways that you want for us as participants.
Yeah, Ron, there is one thread which I think you were planning to sort of talk about anyway if we had time, and that's about the role of visual arts and crafts in thinking about closing the gap and our commitments under closing the gap. So I think it was Emma Vanian that first raised it about PR3, but then others have gone on to talk about its relevance across the whole agreement.
Yeah, that's great. That was going to be my final question, but then I realised that it was going to blow open a whole range of discussions. But taking Emma's point up, and if any of the panelists would like to speak to that, what's the relevance of the national agreement on closing the gap? I should declare that I'm one of the commissioners leading the review of that agreement right at this point in time. We've got a report to deliver at the end of the year. So maybe that's a useful way to think about it. What would you say to me as a review commissioner that where the focus on the national agreement on closing the gap should be stronger, or is it effective? Are there opportunities for this sector through the agreement? Notwithstanding that there's not a lot about the arts in the agreement. So anyone who wants to take that up, relevance of the national agreement, maybe in terms of transforming government. There's that priority reform 3. Governments need to work differently. Business as usual is not anymore on the agenda. Governments need to change the way in which they work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and they need to show some evidence of that. Identifying and eliminating racism is one of those elements within that priority reform 3. We've heard a little bit about racism and the additional burden that is placed on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people within institutions today. But also with these newly emerging institutions, how might government be thinking about and embedding priority reform 3, transforming themselves in setting up these new institutions, for example? We've got 4 minutes.
Ron, just like it's limited in terms of recognition of arts and culture, and that needs to be central. There needs to be recognition in terms of the role, for example, that art centres play in a whole lot of well-being, both cultural, but also physical, mental well-being. There needs to be recognition that art and culture is central to well-being.
Yeah.
And in saying that, appropriate resources need to be directed to in acknowledging that, but also I suppose a silo approach that government has, that those silos need to be broken down in terms of art. So we go for arts funding, but to go to get other is a whole another sort of body of work. So in doing that, also capacity of art centres actually secure these resources that are actually needed, that could be transformative in terms of a community, because for many, they are doing that anyway on very little, with very little resources.
Yeah, thanks, Philip. We've got about 3 minutes left, so it's really kind of a minute each almost. So, Francesca, I know you've got a big program ahead through Creative Australia in whatever form that might take. Do you want to speak to the Closing the Gap agreement?
Look, I think what we all acknowledge is that First Nations people's lived experience of the benefits of having arts and culture and participating in arts and culture is missing from the Closing the Gap framework. I think we should be thinking about consolidated, targeted investment in First Nation arts, culture, and cultural maintenance outcomes as a strategic priority area within the Closing the Gap framework. And the aims are to increase opportunities for First Nation people to directly engage in arts and cultural activities and cultural maintenance and renewal. This really is critical. Simultaneous recognition of Indigenous cultures as a foundation across the framework, with investment in culturally based programs to improve outcomes in early childhood, education, employment, health and wellbeing, community safety, justice and suicide prevention, just to name a few. Arts and culture isn't valued in the way in which Indigenous people have not only flourished across this continent, but really cared for across the last 60,000 years. So we need to recognise how critical arts and culture is to First Nation people, and the rest of Australia will benefit through this investment.
Thanks, Francesca.
Thank you.
Terrific.
Quickly, and
Belinda, please. Yeah.
Apologise, I don't know what the phone quality is like. Zooming back in, but just I'd like to echo what Philip said, and I think everybody's really touched on it. Chad talking about STEAM, and the arts, and of course Francesca, and one of the things that has been important here is we haven't always had an arts centre, and so what we've done has been through other means, and I think recognising the strength of the various regions and what their capability is, building on that and working with that. But in saying that, also with KL Arts, looking at how addressing breakdown of silos, trying to work more integrative and collaborative with our local communities. So I guess if greater means for arts to be invested in the lots of different aspects of our life, whether it is workplace development, training and whatever. Yeah, I think that just touching again, the value on arts, culture, creativity just isn't there really.
Thanks, Belinda. And Chad, I think it's over to you for the last word. And you're on mute. That'll get in the way.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's a massive kind of thing going on at the moment. Come back to the Closing the Gap report. I mean, I guess what I'd like to see is just that the arts isn't sort of pigeonholed and put in the corner in these discussions about government. Anyone who's worked like in community with government agencies, in my working in this space, but also in heritage, that often government departments don't talk to each other. There's massive issues. I've got family members who are illiterate. If you're trying to access, basic services and things through government, it's often a massive challenge. There aren't the mechanisms in place to support people who are, our most vulnerable. But here in the art space, Aboriginal art centres across the country are like vitally important to everyone, and they're a place for everyone. So those people who are our most vulnerable have a place there, and there's opportunity to earn income you know, there's opportunity to build on your education, or and these are, I guess, important things that I try to talk to government about, is that the skills that people learn in art centres are transferable skills. You can, you know, these are real jobs. These are, you know, this is a real place to work and a real contributor to our society and economy. We need to, I guess, look at how we listen to communities and provide access to education and employment. Because you know, if you can't even you know, get through the front door, you know, which I've got so many stories from my family members who just trying to gain that basic thing through Centrelink. You know, if they can't access, or they're just told to go and use that computer over there in the corner, if they don't know how to read and write, you know, how they're even supposed to, you know, they just walk away. So I think acknowledging that this is a one of the most important places for our mob, and in many ways, giving it the respect it deserves, and really government getting behind it, including the arts in the conversation. And yeah.
Terrific, Chad. Like I said, I think this is probably a conversation that should have gone for an hour and a half, so I apologise that we're having to cut it short. Just, I won't try and summarise. What we will do, though, is this is being recorded, so we'll have this as a webinar on the Productivity Commission website that you can go back and refer to. And what we'll do is bring together a bit of a summary of the conversation, maybe a page, probably just a page, in summary form, so that you can then take that into whatever places and spaces you feel appropriate to share this conversation with. I'm sorry that we didn't get to, and I think, Claire, hopefully we've covered off on some of the themes that were merging through the chat. But I just want to acknowledge the deadly panel that we have today: Belinda, Chad, Philip, Francesca, all, I mean, just such a rich contribution for this discussion. But this is not just a discussion at a point in time, right? It's been going for a long time. We're in this space together today, but there's a whole lot of work that needs to take place going forward. While the Commission has completed the report, we will continue to engage, and if there are spaces that you want for me or team members from the Commission to participate in, absolutely reach out to us, and we'll be up for those conversations. But this was just one small post-report offering that we thought was important to really put a focus on Indigenous leadership in the Indigenous arts and crafts space. So thank you all. And I can see lots of beautiful people on the tiles as well. I won't name you all: Joe, Steph, Tina, and so many other people. So thanks for taking the time to participate in this conversation. So thanks, everyone. Stay well.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Ron.
Romilly. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.